Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. As you may be aware, this year Jehovah's Witnesses attended their 2021 Powerful by Faith convention in a socially distanced way by means of a series of pre-recorded talks and videos. Now that the convention is over, I've decided to go back and choose my worst moments from a program that was every bit as manipulative as we've come to expect. Rather than going through the same material all over again, I've decided to organise my rebuttals into 10 examples of the Jehovah's Witness leadership being especially vile in their efforts to control and manipulate their followers. If you don't have much time and you want to skip to a particular example, you'll find a list with timestamps in the description below. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin our countdown with number 10, which is Glockentin, reminding Jehovah's Witnesses to pony up their cash for Jehovah.
There is no other organization that compares to Jehovah's organization. Everything the organization provides and helps with is free of charge. But Jehovah invites all of us to give to him or contribute our material resources according to what we personally decide. Now, why is this giving a matter of faith? Could it be that we hold back because, 1, we might fear that if we are generous, we might not have enough for our own needs? To think this way is understandable. Life is unpredictable and nobody knows what the future holds and what our material needs might be tomorrow. Or could it be that we hold back too because we feel that our personal contribution is so small and therefore insignificant? Maybe we have very little materially because we live in a poor country, or we struggle to cover our expenses for other reasons. So we see that our giving really depends on how we connect this with Jehovah. Our view of Jehovah, our friendship with Jehovah needs to influence our actions, and this requires faith. This is 1 Corinthians 16, and we read verse 2. On the first day of every week, each of you should set something aside according to his own means, so that collections will not take place when I arrive. So the Apostle Paul encouraged Christians to plan ahead, to give. In other words, Paul wanted them to consider their circumstances and to decide on a certain contribution amount. Paul was convinced that this would not result in their lacking material necessities. He himself had experienced the help from Jehovah and he knew that God would care for them. Generous giving would further allow Jehovah to care for them in a generous way. Do we now see how planning ahead is an expression of our faith? When we do this, we are putting Jehovah to the test in a good way. We want to experience how it feels when Jehovah sees us setting the right priorities and in turn becomes our protector and our rewarder. Dear brothers and sisters, you are displaying this kind of faith. Many of you set something aside so that you can contribute when you come to the Kingdom Hall. Others consider their expenses and their financial means and they decide to regularly donate electronically. Even when circumstances have not allowed you to donate the way you've done in the past, you still find a way to give your contribution to Jehovah. Jehovah promised to care for our needs. Do we really believe that? If we do, our faith will help us to give generously.
We're watching Glockentin, who is a helper to the publishing committee. He's taking us through the item, Enter the Door to Activity and Faith, Set Something Aside for Jehovah's Work. And hopefully by now it's obvious what this something is. It's very much about money, isn't it? Apparently, God is broke. God needs cash urgently. So much so that an entire talk on the 2021 Powerful by Faith convention needs to be dedicated to reminding Jehovah's Witnesses of their privilege of setting something aside, setting money aside specifically for Jehovah's work. And in support of this message, Gaius Glockentin reads a Bible verse in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. On the first day of every week, each of you should set something aside according to his own means, so that collections will not take place when I arrive. Gaius Glockentin is obviously focusing on the early part of that sentence. For me, what's most interesting is the second part. It seems that this whole giving thing was an established practice, as it would be in any man-made church, any man-made religion. The point of this particular verse seems to be the latter part, so that collections will not take place when I arrive. Isn't that interesting? So collections were already commonplace, it seems, in the Christian church when Paul was writing. He was purely acknowledging that this was happening. He just didn't want those collections happening when he was there. He wanted it to be very much out of sight, out of mind, that collections were taking place, because it, for whatever reason, made him feel uncomfortable. That's what I take from this verse when we read it in context. Gaius Glockentin doesn't seem interested in the context. He's just interested in finding any excuse whatsoever to remind Jehovah's Witnesses of the need to donate, because apparently their protection is involved.
We want to experience how it feels when Jehovah sees us setting the right priorities, and in turn becomes our protector and our rewarder.
Jehovah becomes our protector, our rewarder. Prior to giving the money, if you don't give the money, he's not your protector. But once a Jehovah's Witness starts giving money, once the first money changes hands or winds up in the contribution box, then all of a sudden, Jehovah sweeps in and he is suddenly the protector. It sounds a little bit like a protection racket, doesn't it? I'm imagining Jehovah as some kind of mafia boss who sends his goons round, in this case Gaius Glockentin, reminding them of their privilege to pay for protection. What exactly do Jehovah's Witnesses need protection from? It seems fairly obvious that if they need protection from anything, or specifically anyone, it's Jehovah, and what Jehovah's going to do to them if they don't serve him acceptably, which includes, it seems, giving of their donations. So in a way, Jehovah is some kind of mafia boss, isn't he? And this is some kind of protection racket. But what most struck me about this talk is, and I suppose we've seen this coming for a while now, is how far this organization is deviating from the way things used to be at the very beginning. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the words of Charles Taze Russell in 1879. In fact, I featured them at the beginning of my Unrighteous Riches video. Thumbnail will appear here, if Tibor is gracious. If you haven't checked it out, please do so, because it links in with some of what I was saying earlier about the building work. I mentioned at the beginning of this video Charles Taze Russell's famous words, which were printed in the second edition of the Watchtower. This is an albeit poor condition, but this is a bound volume, the very first Watchtower bound volume of the years beginning 1879. It goes through to 1887. I actually have a version that's in better condition than this, but I keep this on display because the cover's torn off and you can see very clearly that this is the very first edition of the Watchtower magazine, albeit in bound volume format. Anyway, if you turn to page 20, and I'll have a photograph appear on the screen from my bound volume, so you know that I'm not making this up, although you should recognize these words if you're a current or former Jehovah's Witness. It says, "Do not suppose these remarks to be an appeal for money. No, Zion's watchtower has, we believe, Jehovah for its backer, and while this is the case, it will never beg nor petition men for support. When he who says, 'All the gold and silver of the mountains are mine,' fails to provide necessary funds, we will understand it to be time to suspend the publication." Now, I suppose if you are an apologist for the organization, you might be tempted to say, well, they're not begging. They're just reminding Jehovah's Witnesses of the privilege of setting something aside for Jehovah's work. Well, how often are you going to remind people in that way when they know already that they can do this? The more you remind someone of something that they already know, the more it becomes less of a reminder and more a case of begging or pressuring someone to do whatever it is you're reminding them to do. And how many reminders are Jehovah's Witnesses getting at the moment? We had the May 2015 infamous JW Broadcasting episode in which Stephen Lett went so far as to say, we need money, brothers, because we have more money going out of the organization than we have coming in at this time. You don't need me to play the clip. I'm sure many of you remember that. It was a real turning point because up to that point, I'd never seen such an overt request for money. It was just the occasional Watchtower article that I remember seeing growing up, or maybe the occasional reminder at the assembly or convention. There weren't any videos telling us to do this, not that I can remember. It just seems to be more and more a thing where Jehovah's Witnesses are reminded, begged, essentially, pressured to give their money to the organization to the extent where it's being featured here in a convention item.
We might consider our circumstances and feel that the contribution we can make is so small that it makes no difference. Do you still have 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2 open? What did we read there? Let us read it again. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2. On the first day of every week, each of you should set something aside according to his own means. Did you notice Paul did not specify a certain minimum amount? And later, he mentioned the Macedonian Christians. They were in deep poverty, yet they begged for the privilege of giving. They were happy to give even beyond their means because they were giving to Jehovah. Being poor meant that they individually could not give much, and yet they understood that giving materially is an expression of our worship. Many of you, brothers and sisters, are like those in Macedonia. You have very little, and yet we see your faith by contributing generously according to your circumstances. No matter how small the amount might be, you imitate our generous God Jehovah. And you experience what one sister described in a letter. She wrote, "All these years I've been unable to give but small amounts of money at the Kingdom Hall." Yet she continued, "Jehovah God has given me back much more than I have given." Even our young children can learn to set something aside and give to Jehovah. Here at Warwick, we occasionally receive notes and letters from these young ones who want to give to Jehovah, and they tell us how they appreciate what the organization is doing, especially the videos. This really touches our heart, and we can only imagine how happy it must make Jehovah. Jehovah loves us for giving the best that we have. He values even our small contributions. Even small donations do make a difference and are noticed by Jehovah. He sees our faith in action.
This is so cheap, so desperate, and so frankly human. I mean, where is the spirituality in all of this? Where's the profound wisdom from on high? This is exactly the sort of slimy, shady, money-grubbing rhetoric you would expect from any televangelist, isn't it? And this is what this organization has sunk to. Again, it's unrecognizable from the religion I remember growing up in. There was so much more dignity, I feel, in the Jehovah's Witness religion of the 80s and 90s, in the decades when I was growing up, where requests for money, I mean, maybe they were happening and I was just too young to register them. Or maybe it was just my rose-tinted, cult-addled mind that was blocking these messages out. But how overt it's become. It's just so slimy, isn't it? To the point of dragging in the children and the fact that they're writing in to pledge money, to give money to the organization because the organization has given them videos.
Here at Warwick, we occasionally receive notes and letters from these young ones who want to give to Jehovah. And they tell us how they appreciate what the organization is doing. Especially the videos.
Especially the videos. Yes, of course, the videos, the Caleb and Sophia cartoons, are going to appeal most to the children. So this is apparently the sort of video that children have been writing in and thanking the governing body for, sending money in appreciation for these videos. Videos where they are asked to give money to the organization, at least in this case. And in fact, there's another one as well. There's actually two videos telling children to save money to give to the organization. In this case, go without ice cream so that the organization can build stuff, so that the organization can print stuff, so that people like Tony Morris can spend that ice cream money on trips to the local booze store. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't know what this photograph is all about, or this still, just look up my Bottlegate video and hopefully you'll be able to put two and two together. You'll realize just how inappropriate all of this is. Tony Morris, who's on the teaching committee and who has a say in what cartoons are made, doesn't have a problem with coercing children to give up their ice cream money so that the organization can have that little bit extra money coming into its coffers. Meanwhile, he's found in a liquor store in the vicinity of Warwick Bethel with his shopping cart brimming with expensive booze. He's not willing to give up his booze money, but Jehovah's Witness children are expected to give up their ice cream money. That's how slimy this organization has become.
Jehovah can use wind and water to fight for his people. Why, he's the source of these natural forces, and he can control them perfectly. Please turn with me to Psalm 147, and let's notice that together. Psalm 147, 17. He hurls down his hailstones, like morsels of bread. Who can withstand his cold? He sends out his word, and they melt. He makes his wind blow, and the waters flow. Did you notice to whom these natural forces belong? Verse 17 speaks of his hailstones. Verse 18 says he makes his wind blow. Yes, Jehovah is the source, and he can control them. He proved this in the past. Do you remember the examples given in the video? One was the account in Joshua chapter 10 when the Israelites were fighting the Amorites. Verse 11 states that while the Amorites were fleeing from Israel, Jehovah hurled great hailstones from the sky on them, and they perished. In fact, more died from the hail than from the sword of the Israelites. If Jehovah can create such powerful elements and control them, that should build our faith. It should convince us that he'll be able to use these powerful elements in the future when he defends his people at Armageddon.
Yet more reminders for Jehovah's Witnesses that Armageddon is coming and they will need to be defended because Gog of Magog, a coalition of nations, is out to get them or will be coming to round them up soon, armed with assault weapons. That's seriously what Jehovah's Witnesses are being told to expect here. But what I find most interesting in what we've just heard is this seeming fascination with the weather, and specifically the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses seem to believe, or their leaders seem to believe, that Jehovah controls the weather even to the extent of orchestrating storm clouds, of sending forth hail and rain and wind, you name it. When any of these natural phenomena occur, it's not just a cycle that's in process or that's been put in process when the world was made. No, God is actually guiding the weather so that we can attribute weather events to God. You might be thinking, come on, Lloyd, he can't really mean that. I'm sure Leonard Myers isn't stupid enough to be seriously suggesting that each weather event can be attributed to God. But listen to what he says.
Did you notice to whom these natural forces belong? Verse 17 speaks of his hailstones. Verse 18 says he makes his wind blow. Yes, Jehovah is the source, and he can control them.
God can and does control the weather, according to Leonard Myers and, by extension, the governing body. It's not just a cycle that's been put in process, again, when the earth was made. The weather is continually being steered, apparently, and guided by Jehovah. And this actually harmonizes with other things that we've heard from the governing body and through JW Broadcasting. There have been occasions where they have suggested, seriously suggested, that Jehovah has guided or controlled the weather to the benefit of the organization. Here's one example from the 2013 annual meeting when Jeffrey Jackson unveiled the new 2013 edition of the New World Translation.
It's interesting when we think about the production of this, we truly have seen Jehovah's hand in helping the project. Just one example. The brothers in the Wallkill printery mentioned to us that normally the worst time of the year to print Bibles is summertime because of the humidity, the heat. Oftentimes they have to stop the presses. But they told us this year when they had to do a lot of extra overtime to get these Bibles ready for us, and as you can see, there's one for each person here attending our program. This year, there was no stoppage of Bible production. We had the mildest summer for many, many years, and we thank Jehovah for that.
And more recently, in the January 2016 JW Broadcasting episode, we heard the following experience from a construction volunteer named Travis Brooks.
So for that extension, we would need cement and sand for backfill. And again, this was an island, which is ironic that you can't really get sand on because there's no companies that sell it. So what you do is you go from village to village asking the village chief if he would be willing to sell sand off of his beach. Well, after visiting all the villages, no one was willing to sell any of their sand that we needed. At that point, things got worse because there was a typhoon approaching the island. So we just had the construction crew stop work. So the next morning, we were able to get in contact with the construction overseer on the island. And he said, "I've got really good news. There was no damage. The storm took a turn just before it hit the island and just grazed it." He says, "I have some other good news. I just got a call from the village chiefs. Apparently the storm surge had washed up a bunch of sand over their road to their villages, and they had no way of removing it. So they said, 'We have plenty of sand. Can you come and help us get rid of it?' So we ended up having enough sand for the rest of the project." Jehovah's blessing is the most important thing that we can have on our projects, from the start to the finish.
So when it suits him, when it's needed in order for literature to be printed, or kingdom halls to be built or renovated, God is willing to use these immense forces in the clouds to the advantage and benefit of the organization, even intervening in Earth's weather patterns so that books can be printed and sand can be delivered for construction projects. And bear in mind, this typhoon that Travis Brooks was referring to seems to have been Typhoon Maisak, which, according to Wikipedia, killed 4 people, injured 10, and caused $8.5 million worth of damage to property. But all of this, apparently, this was collateral damage that was worthwhile just so Jehovah could assist in having a Kingdom Hall refurbished. And it obviously goes without saying, if we're going to attribute favorable weather events to Jehovah, if we're going to say Jehovah is responsible for printing books for Jehovah's Witnesses and helping the construction projects of Jehovah's Witnesses through the weather, what do we then say about weather events where Jehovah's Witnesses are injured or even killed, including in the Philippines Typhoon Haiyan, where dozens of Jehovah's Witnesses lost their lives? You can't have it both ways and suggest that God is responsible for guiding and controlling the weather when it suits you, and then invoke Ecclesiastes 9 verse 11, blaming it on time and unexpected events when things go wrong and people lose their lives. Seriously, if you take this view, which they seem to take, I mean, I'm not imagining things, am I, viewers? This is the language that we're hearing in this talk at the 2021 Powerful by Faith Convention. Leonard Myers is specifically saying that God controls the weather, that these verses in Psalms, he quotes from Psalm 147, he hurls down his hailstones, he sends out his word, and they melt. God sends the hailstones, each and every hailstone, he sends it, and then he sends out a word, and they melt. He makes his wind blow, and the waters flow. Leonard Myers isn't reading these verses and saying, of course, this is just poetic. This is just a system that was put in place when the earth was made. It's not like God is literally sending out his word and melting hailstones or sending them forth to begin with. This is just a poetic verse. No, he's reading it and seemingly applying it literally. And this, as stupid as it is, this stupidity is at least consistent with the bizarre claims and rhetoric that we've heard previously from this organization when it comes to the weather and how God uses it.
The video partially quoted a scripture that emphasizes that point. Let's read it together. Job chapter 38, Job 38:22. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of battle and war? Did you notice that Jehovah says he has storehouses of hail reserved for the day of battle? Psalm 135 verse 7 mentions storehouses of wind. In these verses, Jehovah speaks of things he's reserved under his control for special purposes. How can this knowledge of Jehovah's storehouses build our faith? When we're attacked during the Great Tribulation by God's enemies, no matter how powerful or threatening they may seem, they can't possibly survive Jehovah's anger. For example, if we go back to Ezekiel chapter 38 and glance at verse 22, we see things Jehovah will use against those enemies of pure worship. Besides pestilence, fire, and sulfur, notice what else Jehovah will use in the middle of the verse. It says, I will rain down a torrential downpour and hailstones. Yes, Jehovah will use water. He may use hailstones of undisclosed size to destroy those wicked humans. Notice his assurance at the end of Ezekiel chapter 38. Notice verse 23. And I will certainly magnify myself and sanctify myself and make myself known before the eyes of many nations, and they will have to know that I am Jehovah. What a thrilling time that will be. As these enemies are defeated, they will know that it is Jehovah God who is bringing destruction upon them. May our anticipation of that happy outcome and our study of creation build our faith now as we confidently look forward to Jehovah's complete victory.
The man is obsessed, isn't he? He relishes the destruction of people who don't share his religious views. That's what we're seeing here. Effectively, a bloodlust for the destruction of all non-Jehovah's Witnesses when Armageddon comes, to the point where he is fixating on the size of the hailstones that will fall down on non-Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yes, Jehovah will use water. He may use hailstones of undisclosed size to destroy those wicked humans. What a thrilling time that will be. As these enemies are defeated, they will know that it is Jehovah God who is bringing destruction upon them.
He's not just salivating over the size of the hailstones of undisclosed size. Could be a kilo, could be the size of a car, who knows? Undisclosed, but they'll be deadly. He's not just salivating over the fact that that ice will be used to kill people. He's also salivating over what's going to be going through the minds of the people who are being killed. As these enemies are defeated, they will know that it's Jehovah God who's bringing destruction upon them. What difference does it make? You want rid of these people. You want a global genocide where the earth is only populated by people who share your views, Leonard Myers. What difference does it make to you what's going on in their heads as they're being eliminated? It's kind of sadistic, isn't it? As they're being killed, as they're in the process of being slaughtered, in their final moments, during their final few breaths, they'll know who it is who's doing this to them. That's probably the most chilling thing about what we've just heard. But we also have more sheer nonsense about weather and the way weather works and the fact that weather is controlled by God. We've heard Leonard Myers insisting that this verse that was used in the video about storehouses taken from Job 38, Leonard Myers is insisting that Job 38:22 is accurate when it says, "Have you seen the storehouses of the hail?" I included this verse in my 40 examples of scientific inaccuracies because what this is telling us, have you seen the storehouses of the hail, is that hail gets stored. It's made, and we all know how a storehouse works, and bear in mind this was written by people who were in an agricultural community. We all understand how storehouses work. You farm a crop, you store the crop and you're storing it so that you can either use it to make food or sell it at a later stage. The hail isn't stored in that way. As the video itself explains, the hail forms in the clouds, and when it gets heavy enough to fall, when the updrafts can no longer sustain the weight of the hailstone falls.
Hail usually forms in warm weather, when turbulent air produces thunderstorms with powerful updrafts. Those updrafts can pull a piece of dust or ice high into the cloud, where water freezes around it. Each trip up into the cloud adds a layer of ice and weight until it becomes a hailstone that is heavy enough to fall.
So even Budget Attenborough admits that hail isn't stored in the clouds. There isn't like this massive storehouse of hail that's being moved around our planet so that when God wants to kill people, he just opens it and the hail all falls down. That's not how hail works. Hail forms in the clouds and it falls. It isn't stored. So this verse in Job, like many other verses in Job, I might add, this verse in Job 38 is actually scientifically inaccurate. It's making a statement about the natural order that we know, due to our study of meteorology, is fundamentally untrue. But rather than acknowledge this, Leonard Myers is all on board and fully endorsing this idea of storehouses of hail because it fits in with his apparent bloodlust. He can't wait to see these storehouses of hail deployed against those who don't share his views.
Would you like to assist with a theocratic building project? You may see reports regarding branch construction and renovation, or the need for new kingdom halls and remote translation offices. And this may cause you to wonder if you could have a share. Well, that is a wonderful goal. Now, primarily, we need brothers and sisters who have a strong relationship with Jehovah and a willing spirit. Those are the qualities we need. Construction or technical skills can be learned. And strong faith will give us the confidence that if we are invited, Jehovah will make us equal to the task and help us to develop the skills that are needed. And faith will also help us to trust that Jehovah will care for us when our assignment is over. For example, one couple had to give up their apartment and resign from their secular employment to help with a project. Now, they said they did feel some anxiety as the end of their 6-month assignment neared, but they trusted that Jehovah would help them, and help he did. When they returned, they called their former employer. Not only did he offer them their job back, but it was at better terms. And they said that within 1 week of returning back, they had found a new apartment. In another example, the local design construction department invited a brother to work for a few months on a project. Now, at the time, he was working full-time with a major company. He had good benefits, a good salary, a company car, housing. He requested a leave of absence. They denied his request. Our brother decided to take the LDC assignment anyway. He was fired from his job. So what would he do after he completed his assignment? Well, he actually was able to find a part-time job that has allowed him to stay in full-time service. And now he is a pioneer. He and his wife are pioneers, and he's serving as a remote volunteer for a branch construction project. And similar stories are repeated over and over. Jehovah foretold that during these last days, a great crowd would worship him acceptably. And the fulfillment of that prophecy has created an urgent need for more kingdom halls, assembly halls, branch facilities, remote translation offices. Now, we understand that the pandemic has limited theocratic building projects to some extent at this time. However, there is still much work to do now and on into the future. So if assisting with a theocratic building project is your goal, you can be confident that you too will become powerful by faith. Take that leap. You will enjoy Jehovah's support and many, many blessings.
Sorry, I just can't resist putting a picture of you two whenever they say you two. It's just my sense of humour. You must forgive me. But we here have Robert Lucioni, who is a helper to the publishing committee. He is giving the symposium item, Enter the Door to Activity and Faith, assist with a theocratic building project. And clearly his brief is to persuade Jehovah's Witnesses in the audience that they might want to consider helping the governing body build stuff. What is it with this religion's obsession with building? I mean, I can remember, I don't know, quick builds being a thing when I was a Jehovah's Witness. And obviously they would have building projects involving branch facilities that were built with volunteer labour. They would bring in, obviously, free labour to get this stuff built. It was clearly a thing when I was a Jehovah's Witness. But never before have I seen such a focus on this. This seems to be increasingly becoming, I don't know, more of a property company where they're obsessed with building things. Apparently, Jehovah is some celestial property entrepreneur, and he needs his followers to help him expand his portfolio. Since when was God so reliant on stuff being built? In fact, isn't there a verse that says that God doesn't dwell in buildings? Here we are, Acts 17, verses 24 and 25. The God who made the world and all the things in it, being as he is, Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in handmade temples, nor is he served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. That was a verse that sort of resonated with me as a Jehovah's Witness. Yeah, why does God need stuff? When you look at all other religions, when you look at, say, Catholicism and the grandeur of the Vatican, it's obvious that human religions are obsessed with amassing wealth and amassing property. It's been going on for centuries, going right the way back to the first century, as Paul is commenting here. So you would think that Jehovah's Witnesses, aspiring to be pure worship, aspiring to be the one and only true religion, they would distance themselves from this idea that, oh, we absolutely need stuff. We absolutely need bricks and mortar. We need real estate. We need assets that we can control. This is all very human, isn't it? It's got human fingerprints all over it. And yet Jehovah's Witnesses are being asked to mobilize for this building project to the extent where they're being encouraged to give up their jobs. They're giving examples of two, one a couple, one an individual on his own, an individual volunteer. He gives two examples of Jehovah's Witnesses giving up their jobs to increase and expand the governing body's property portfolio, which is, if you think about it, reprehensible. It's, again, putting the needs of the organization ahead of the needs of individuals. And he can point all he likes to success stories, but that's not like a guarantee, is it? I mean, I'm sure if you were to sacrifice your job and go and build something like a branch facility, and then you were to go back to your employer and say, can I have my old job back, perhaps on better terms than before? And if your employer were to say, get lost, you couldn't then phone up Robert Lucioni and say, excuse me, Robert Lucioni, you indicated in your talk that I would be blessed. It's not going to work that way. What's happening here is Robert Lucioni is very clearly cherry-picking, in a very manipulative way, success stories that help him with his agenda, help him with this narrative of recruiting people to build stuff. And he'll be ignoring, I'm sure, the cases where it hasn't gone so well. and where Jehovah's Witnesses have been worse off, financially and otherwise, as a result of sacrificing everything just so the governing body can have stuff built for them.
In the following video, note how Sarah found the courage to assist in a theocratic building project.
Hi, darling, we're back.
When I learned I was invited to work for a few weeks on the upcoming construction project, I was thrilled. But that excitement quickly turned into anxiety because of what I had to do. I prayed to Jehovah for weeks to give me the strength to have the conversation with my employer.
All right, Sarah, come in. So?
I wanted to first of all say thank you for taking it. I began to explain about the construction project and how I'd been invited to volunteer. I really like the time to...
So you want time off during the busiest time of our year?
Well, yes, but...
It's your choice, but under no circumstances will I hold your position.
Suddenly, this beautiful privilege felt like a huge risk. Was I making my life more complicated by doing this? I read the account about the people in Nehemiah's day. Their willing spirit demonstrated faith, and Jerusalem's walls were built by people who put their heart into the work. I didn't want to miss out on the opportunity to serve Jehovah in that way. This is my resignation letter. I had to have faith that Jehovah would bless my decision. I'm not sure what the future holds when I get back, but I know Jehovah will take care of me. For now, I'm going to focus on putting my heart into the work.
Isn't this manipulative? They're not just reading anecdotes of nameless people who've quit their jobs and everything's gone well for them. They're also showing highly produced propaganda dramatizations, encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to do this with absolutely zero guarantee that things will work out for them. And how can there be any guarantee? Again, Robert Lucioni before was cherry-picking the stories where it went well. Goodness knows how many Jehovah's Witnesses have quit their jobs for building projects and been far worse off as a result. But never mind that, here the governing body are producing a dramatization encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to be this reckless with their careers. And if you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness watching this, because I realise some Jehovah's Witnesses do watch my videos, just think about what all of this is for. This is literally to build real estate. This is to build stuff out of bricks and mortar. This is to pour concrete. This is to create a physical asset that will be of use to an organization and, most importantly, is resellable so that this girl, for example, could quit her job to go and work on one of these construction projects. They could build, I don't know, a kingdom hall or an assembly hall or a branch facility. And then there's nothing stopping the organization from just a few months or years later saying, actually, we're going to sell this. So that it ends up being, I don't know, a Burger King or a gym or a hotel. Who knows? Nothing is stopping the organization cashing in on this free labour, and look at what people are expected to give so that they can do this. They are expected to put their careers on hold, to put themselves in financial jeopardy, all so that the governing body can have more buildings.
During that time, some angels from heaven noticed beautiful human women and developed lustful feelings for them. These angels rebelled against God by coming to earth and taking on human bodies in order to have sex with the women. They became selfish and wicked demons. They may have been charming, intelligent, handsome, and they had supernatural powers. They must have been irresistible, especially to women who themselves had no love of God. Perhaps the angels took some women by force. Whatever the case, the angels took all whom they chose.
Yes, so this is Storytime with Uncle Tony, otherwise known as Noah Faith Moved Him to Obey, the dramatic Bible reading. We're only a short way in, and already there's rape. Tony just casually drops in this suggestion that when the angels rebelled and came down to the earth before Noah's flood, maybe there was rape. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but let's include it anyway. What's the harm in just casually mentioning rape in a convention where there are children? There are children in the audience. In fact, it's compulsory for Jehovah's Witness families to bring along their children and have them sit through Storytime with Uncle Tony. And in case there's any doubt about this, let's just remind ourselves of what Jeffrey Jackson said earlier on in the convention session.
As scriptures are read, follow along in the Bible. And may God's word empower you to be a man, woman, or child of faith.
So yes, let it be clear, Tony Morris knows there are children in the audience, expects there to be children in the audience, taking notes, hanging off his every word, and yet here he is drooling over the thought that there might have been rape in the run-up to Noah's flood.
What human on earth at that time could hope to stop demons? To these godless creatures, people lost their daughters, their sisters, and possibly even their wives. The women became pregnant and gave birth to sons, but their sons were not like other boys. They were stronger. They were bullies, aggressive, fierce, and brutal. Those qualities stayed with them as they grew. The boys became men, but they were unusually cruel. They were called Nephilim, possibly meaning those who cause others to fall down, and people feared them. Like their fathers, the Nephilim had no love for God, and they cared only about their fame for being strong and vicious. The materialized angels and their savage offspring dominated the world of that time, and people followed their lead. Jehovah saw that man's wickedness was rampant, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only bad all the time. How Satan must have delighted to see most humans reject Jehovah and become more and more corrupt.
So yes, more totally age-appropriate material for children in the audience in Storytime with Uncle Tony, where he's talking about aggressive Nephilim, who, by the way, never existed. I mean, I touched on this in my scientific inaccuracies video. We're supposed to believe that there were once these giants who roamed the earth, who were angel-human hybrids, and they were ultra-strong superheroes who dominated the world of that time. And yet they managed to somehow die without leaving any archaeological remains at all. Isn't that interesting? It's an unscientific claim. But of course, Tony's going to dwell on this point because he needs to justify what's coming, the global slaughter. He needs to make the world that's described in the Bible as being the pre-flood world, he needs to make that as depraved and sinister and evil and scary as possible, despite being the only governing body member who actually has children, and therefore being in a position where he should know better. He spares no thought for how terrified children are going to be watching this, even to the point where they show this graphic, and hopefully Tibor will overlay it if he is gracious. We have a graphic there of Nephilim. One appears to be grabbing a woman. If you're a young girl in the audience, you can imagine how terrifying that would be. In the background, we have another Nephilim raising someone by the neck, strangling them. And this is somehow age appropriate. The teaching committee signed this off and said, yes, this is absolutely fine for children in the audience to watch. Jehovah's Witness parents forced to make their children watch this, and this will be okay for them. This won't scare them. This won't be inappropriate for them. Honestly, what planet are they on straight out of the gate in the first session of the 2021 convention? They're doing as they please. They're showing children these images, which I'm sure will haunt some children watching this. And I also found it interesting where Tony Morris is talking about the materialized angels, and he was describing how awful they were by saying,
to these godless creatures, people lost their daughters, their sisters, and possibly even their wives.
Doesn't that describe the 8 men making up the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, including Anthony Morris III, and the fact that they break apart families through their horrendous shunning policy?
At Psalm 68, verse 5, Jehovah is called a father of the fatherless. Are you a fatherless child? Or do you have a fatherless child or fatherless children in your congregation? You may be wondering, what do we mean by fatherless child? Well, in the context of our discussion, we're talking about young people who have only one believing parent in the truth. Now, that allows for a spectrum of possibilities. It could be a single-parent family. It could be a religiously divided family, and especially when the unbeliever is opposed. It could even include a situation where only one parent is actively serving Jehovah.
We're watching Seth Hyatt, who is a helper to the governing body's service committee, and this is significant. It's significant that he is a helper on this particular committee, as I'm going to come to. It's relevant to what he's telling us. But the title of his talk is Successful Fighters for the Faith, Those Being Raised by Single Parents. And he starts off by talking about fatherless children and quickly needs to define what he means by fatherless children. Does he mean literally fatherless children or children who have been orphaned? No. This has a specific meaning.
Well, in the context of our discussion, we're talking about young people who have only one believing parent in the truth.
So that's what we're talking about. There's only one parent who's able to indoctrinate the child into the cult. That's what this is about. It's not about whether someone is genuinely fatherless. It's not about whether the child is fatherless or not. It's about whether they only have one parent who's indoctrinating them into the Jehovah's Witness religion. And you can see why that would be a problem for Seth Hyatt. You can see why there would be an issue here if you are an organization or part of an organization that's in the business of exploiting children before they're able to develop critical thinking skills, if you're in the business of mass child indoctrination and a certain child only has one believing parent, even if they have both parents, oh no, there's only one of them that's going to indoctrinate them, we'd better make an entire talk on this subject. This is a potentially very undesirable situation from the point of view of child indoctrination. Let's devote an entire talk on our convention to dealing with this threat to our organization. We can't let pesky, unbelieving parents get in the way. We need to make sure these kids get indoctrinated as Jehovah's Witnesses, no matter what.
All of us, like Jehovah, need to appreciate the fatherless children in our congregations. We should view them as modern-day Timothys. In the year 65 CE, Paul was a prisoner in Rome, with no prospect of being released. In fact, his death was imminent. Time to write one more letter. To whom did he write? To Timothy, his beloved child in the faith. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. For I recall your unhypocritical faith, which dwelled first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, but which I am confident is also in you. Well, in a similar way, we can offer specific, sincere, heartfelt commendation to fatherless children and their parents, and commend them for what they're able to do. Include them in spiritual and recreational activities. When I was a boy, my grandmother used to pick me up every Saturday morning and take me in the ministry. I never had to wonder if she was coming, and I never had to wonder who I would work with. The book study conductor, an older brother, would always include my grandmother and me in the group with him and his wife. I cherish those memories.
Do you now, Seth Hyatt? Well, good for you. I'm glad that worked out well for you. But what you've just said is frankly reckless and irresponsible and highlights very straightforwardly how naive and blasé this organization is when it comes to child protection. This material was so enraging when I was going over it the first time as part of the preparation for this rebuttal, because you must remember I am a core participant to the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse for England and Wales, basically an investigation back in my home country of the UK of the way child safeguarding is handled in various different institutions. And I am a core participant for the investigation that's looking into Jehovah's Witnesses. And I won't bore you with my thoughts on that whole investigation. I've made lots of videos about it and my various misadventures with Watchtower's service department with the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. But one of the things that came up in our investigation was that Jehovah's Witnesses were trying to argue every which way that they have no responsibility to implement child safeguarding measures. They shouldn't be held accountable for any problems or any issues surrounding child safeguarding, because according to them, they don't separate children from their parents, and they don't have any activities such as Sunday schools where children are separated from their parents and as part of congregation-sponsored activities, which is obviously nonsense. And in my evidence to the inquiry, and I think the same is true of the other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who were involved, in my evidence, I listed 4 ways in which the organization does indeed give individuals access to children so that children are effectively separated from their parents, or at least may find themselves in a situation where they're alone with another congregant and their parent can't see what's happening. And those 4 areas were questions for baptism. And yes, in the organized book, it does suggest that parents should ideally be there. But there's wiggle room, even in the organized book, for situations where certainly an unbelieving parent wouldn't be there. And it certainly doesn't write off the idea of doing the questions anyway if the parents can't be there. So that's one area. Second of all, meetings for field service. This is just obvious, isn't it, really? We all know, or those of us who've been Jehovah's Witnesses know, what it's like to go to a meeting for field service as a child. You get assigned someone to work with, and frequently the brother or sister that you get assigned to work with isn't a family member, so that you end up going to the territory and going off down the street with this dude or with this lady who isn't even in your family. You're trusting them because they're a member of your congregation, and you're both involved in a congregation-sponsored activity. I mean, it's just obvious, isn't it? I don't know how you could even try and deny that this is a way in which children could be abused and have been abused. But guess what? Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, did deny that that was a way that children could be abused. Bible studies is another example. I can remember, as a ministerial servant in my congregation, being asked by the elders to go and study with kids in the congregation where one of the parents either wasn't a believer or they maybe weren't very active in the congregation. So that's a third way that children get separated from their parents. And also on my list, fourthly, was fatherless children, which is exactly what Seth Hyatt is talking about here. He's saying that if there are children in the congregation where one of the parents isn't a believer, it's basically a free-for-all, and everyone should consider it their responsibility to both encourage that child and involve them in spiritual and recreational activities.
Well, in a similar way, we can offer specific, sincere, heartfelt commendation to fatherless children and their parents, and commend them for what they're able to do. Include them in spiritual and recreational activities.
Include them in spiritual and recreational activities. Basically, a blanket invitation for everyone in the congregation to spend time with these fatherless children just because one of the parents might not be a Jehovah's Witness. And this is where I need to revisit the fact that Seth Hyatt is a helper to the service committee. It's the service committee that looks after the service department, and it's the service department of Watchtower that keeps the database. Seth Hyatt may seem all innocent, and he may come across as quite sincere and likable, at least compared to some of the other characters we need to put up with. But trust me, he is in on it. When you work in the service department, or when you're on the service committee, you are knee-deep in the child sex abuse issues that Jehovah's Witnesses are facing at the moment. This man has first-hand involvement in the industrial scale cover-up of child abuse. So he knows, Seth Hyatt, how bad this problem is. He knows how many names are on that database, how many thousands of names are on that database. He knows how widespread child abuse is across the thousands of congregations in the United States alone. And here he is taking to the convention platform and giving a blanket invitation to associate with children, to spend time with children. He doesn't say whether it's with other people. He just says include them in spiritual and recreational activities. That could be with other people, or it could be an adult alone with a child. As long as it's in the interests of the organization, as long as it's with the aim of strengthening the faith of this fatherless child, we'll overlook the countless ways this advice could go so badly and end up resulting in yet more children being abused and having their abuse covered up.
In the following dramatization, note how our brother imitates Noah's faith.
The world is such a mess. It's everything Jesus said it would be. She's so good, spiritually minded like her mother was. Can I expect she'll stay that way on her own?
Generation of Design, premiering tonight at 8:30 Central.
In the wake of a massive earthquake with a magnitude of 8.1 that struck off the
Leaders
north.
from around the world have come together and made notable statements on social media today expressing confidence. One leader posted, "Finally, we are seeing global coordination that gives us the hope of a secure future. We have a unique opportunity to end harm."
If it is just like Noah's day, I need to show faith like he did.
Let's do our family worship.
Okay.
I need to show faith in Jehovah and work hard to save my family.
Did you notice how our brother acted in faith? Our brother imagined what could happen to his daughter if she lost her spirituality and adopted the lifestyle of the world. What he saw really scared him. He immediately turned off the TV and joined his daughter for family worship. Parents, by imitating Noah, you can save both yourself and your family.
And there we have it. This, for me, is the most disgusting and overtly manipulative video that we've seen so far at this year's convention. What was all that about? A girl is sitting in a leather jacket and wearing eyeliner and being collected by her boyfriend, and we have ominous music, we have a heartbeat sound effect. It's like it's some kind of horror movie, and it's all intended to terrify Jehovah's Witnesses into thinking that if they don't keep up with their indoctrination routine, specifically regarding family worship evenings, there's a good chance their child is going to die when Armageddon comes. That's the clear message here, because we're talking about the context of Noah's day and how if you weren't in the ark when the flood of Noah hit, you were going to drown. And similarly today, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, if you're not faithful as a Jehovah's Witness when Armageddon comes, you're going to be on the wrong end of a fireball. Do you want your daughter to die a fiery death while she's out on a date with her boyfriend? Of course you don't. So you're going to do what's expected of you as a Jehovah's Witness parent and make sure your daughter gets indoctrinated. What does this extreme level of scaremongering say about this organization? They can't simply say, we'd like it if you keep up with your family worship evenings, because that way you will strengthen your family spiritually and they will benefit. No. They have to put on the ominous music. They have to include the heartbeat sound effect. They have to inspire fear and terror in the minds of Jehovah's Witness parents, because they want the next generation of Jehovah's Witness followers to be indoctrinated, whatever it takes.
In the following dramatization, Note how someone who has just started to have a good relationship with God might need to display strong faith like that of the Phoenician woman.
I never thought it would happen. I finally found what I'd been searching for. A good relationship with God. Then one day, a coworker texted an article that claimed to expose Jehovah's Witnesses. I was tempted to read it. And then I thought back to when I first met Jehovah's Witnesses. I was so excited about what they taught me from the Bible. That God's name is Jehovah, the kingdom is a real government, and so much more. Why would I want to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses from their enemies? But my friends, not so much. I saw people who really love one another. It's a real brotherhood. But it wasn't just the people. This was the truth. I didn't need to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses from their enemies. I had seen for myself that they worshiped the true God, Jehovah.
Did you notice how the young man recognized and put faith in Jehovah's organization? That was a protection, so he wasn't misled by lies from our enemies.
So we're watching Leonard Myers in his talk, Imitate Women of Strong Faith, the Phoenician Woman. And isn't this just a continuation of David Splane's apostate bashing talk from the Saturday afternoon? I mean, the message is exactly the same. Jehovah's Witnesses here being told to bury their heads in the sand if they encounter anything at all that's critical of their religion. In this case, the dramatization features someone who's studying to become a Jehovah's Witness. And isn't it interesting, before we even get into the whole apostasy thing, isn't it interesting the change in his appearance between when they meet him and when he's giving us this monologue? He starts off with dreadlocks, and by the time he's giving this monologue, he's minus the dreadlocks. He's had to conform his appearance to Jehovah's Witness expectations, even if that means denuding him of an expression of his culture. I think that's very telling. This, for me, should be an issue of concern for anyone who's thinking about studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. If this is the level to which they micromanage you, if they're literally expecting black men to shave off their dreadlocks, what does that tell you about how controlling this group is? And this is in a video that's supposed to be accusing people like me of lying, of exaggerating about Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't need to lie, Leonard Myers. I don't need to exaggerate. You're doing my work for me. You're literally depicting a black man having to shave off his dreadlocks to conform to Jehovah's Witness expectations. And then we get these terrible arguments for ignoring criticism of Jehovah's Witnesses that don't make any sense at all.
I was so excited about what they taught me from the Bible. That God's name is Jehovah, the kingdom is a real government, and so much more. Why would I want to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses from their enemies?
Why would I want to learn about a school I'm considering enrolling my child in from people who've had children go to that school? Of course, if you're considering joining a religion, you're going to want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly from people who've been in that religion, not just those who are still in it and are obviously going to have good things to say about it, but people who've left. Why would you exclude their testimony? If you're going to get a rounded picture of what a religion is like, why would you only listen to one side of the argument? And quite frankly, I found the whole wording of that question quite a straw man, because the question was, why would I want to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses from their enemies? I don't consider Jehovah's Witnesses to be my enemies. And I'm arguably one of the most well-known sources of videos that criticize Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't consider them my enemies. I take exception to the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses lying to and manipulating Jehovah's Witnesses, because I think for the most part, Jehovah's Witnesses are kind, loving people who don't deserve to be lied to and don't deserve to be manipulated, and that's why I make this information available. My criticism is against the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses, the governing body, not against Jehovah's Witnesses as individuals, as a people. So it's really a straw man criticism, a straw man argument that's being presented here. And you only construct a straw man argument if your position is weak, so that you need to misrepresent the other side. It's a tool of manipulation. When you need to exaggerate the opposing side to your argument, you are trying to mislead. You are trying to manipulate. And I love the part where he lists all the many things he's learning about God and the Bible. I was so excited about what they taught me from the Bible, that God's name is Jehovah, the kingdom is a real government, and so much more. Yeah, wow, what an extensive list. You've learned that God's name is Jehovah, which it isn't. It's actually Yahweh, if we want to be precise. And you've learned that the kingdom is a government. And that's apparently enough for you to ignore any criticism whatsoever against a religion that you're joining, a religion that wants to control you, and in fact has already persuaded you to alter your appearance by shaving off your dreadlocks. He also says,
I saw people who really love one another. It's a real brotherhood. But it wasn't just the people. This was the truth.
Yeah, if it were a cult, you wouldn't be able to say that, would you? You wouldn't be seeing a group of followers who all love one another. You wouldn't be seeing a brotherhood where people from the same group look out for each other and do nice things to each other and love bomb each other. That's not the sort of thing cults do, is it? Except it obviously is. Look, I can't help but see this dramatization as yet another own goal. It's a good example, in my view, of the Streisand effect. The Wikipedia article on the Streisand effect describes it this way. The Streisand effect is a social phenomenon that occurs when an attempt to hide, remove, or censor information has the unintended consequence of further publicizing that information, often via the internet. Because the organization are so deluded, because they don't apparently know, because they are so inept when it comes to basic human psychology, they just cannot help but showing how desperate they are. And the more they tell Jehovah's Witnesses, don't look behind the curtain, it's basic human psychology that Jehovah's Witnesses are going to want to look behind the curtain, especially if they had doubts to begin with. And I obviously can't prove it, but I would guess that probably the majority of Jehovah's Witnesses have doubts at some level. And if you're repeatedly being told, both overtly in talks by David Splane, for example, and through dramatizations, don't look at the apostate material, don't look at the apostate material, you're going to sort of be tempted to see what all of the fuss is about. And especially if you're not being given an actual reason why it's, quote, poison, if the organization can give no firm examples of exactly why apostate material is lying, is misleading, is poison, what other conclusion can you reasonably come to than that the apostates might be onto something? If you're going to insist, if you're going to bark orders at someone and say, don't do this, and if you're going to do that repeatedly with any kind of success, it really behooves you to sit down with that person and explain exactly why it is that you're doing this. If you're barking these orders and there's no obvious reason why the person shouldn't do that thing, it's only human nature that the person, while your back is turned, is going to think, I'm going to see what's so bad about this thing that I'm repeatedly being told not to do without any explanation at all or any logical explanation of why I shouldn't do it. So I, for one, am grateful that the organization is quite clearly reeling from the efforts of apostates and possibly from media exposure and lawsuits, etc., to the point where they are desperate enough to make these mistakes. It's encouraging. And it will be very interesting to see what long-term effect this paranoia and scaremongering has on individual witnesses. Don't be surprised if in the coming years we hear of people waking up and coming out of the religion precisely because of the sort of material we've just seen.
The talk put up a hard fight for the faith, reminded us that, as is true in all fights, in our fight, we have enemies. For one thing, we must reject apostate lies and the false stories of other opposers, which are designed to sow doubt and weaken faith. Satan is very skilled at using innuendo, half-truths, and lies. So it's not surprising that the news media, which is often manipulated by apostates, clergymen, and other opposers, likewise often employs innuendo, half-truths, and lies against Jehovah's organization. Think about this. Faith is a product of Holy Spirit. It's a provision from Jehovah to strengthen us, whereas doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken us. Do you recall how Satan approached Eve? Is it really so that God said, you must not eat from every tree of the garden? Is that really so? Why did he present it that way? To plant doubt and shipwreck her faith. And he succeeded. Well, likewise, if we're not careful, doubt can shipwreck our faith. But strong faith keeps doubt out of our hearts and minds.
So here we're being treated to a 3.5-minute reprise of David Splane's 34-minute apostate rant from the Saturday afternoon of the convention. Stephen Lett wants in on the action. He's adding his own 2 cents, and in so doing, he just cannot help but show how culty this organization is.
Faith is a product of Holy Spirit. It's a provision from Jehovah to strengthen us, whereas doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken us.
Yes, if you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness with doubts, how dare you? You need to get rid of those doubts, because doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken you. If you harbor doubts, you are letting Satan weaken you. You need to instead just believe everything. Just believe everything, so long as it comes from the governing body. You're not allowed to believe anything you hear that's critical of Jehovah's Witnesses. And isn't that the gist? Isn't that the entire message, both of what Stephen Lett's saying here and of David Splane's talk? You're only allowed to trust us. You have to automatically dismiss as lies anything that's critical of the organization. And just as David Splane refused to give a single example of what these lies are, so that Jehovah's Witnesses can reach their own conclusions as to whether they actually are lies or not, Stephen Lett's following the same playbook. He's refusing to give a single example. And this is an insult. This is insulting the intelligence of his audience. If he really respected his audience, if he really esteemed his audience and dignified them with the ability to figure things out for themselves, he would give us at least one example of an apostate lie, any example, and he would demonstrate how it's a lie. But he's not going to do that, is he? Because it turns out that apostates are right, and both Stephen Lett and David Splane know this. They know that if Jehovah's Witnesses look behind the curtain, once they've realized that they're being lied to and manipulated, this will result in shipwreck.
If we're not careful, doubt can shipwreck our faith.
If you're in the wrong faith, if your faith is wrong, if your religion is false, maybe your faith needs to be shipwrecked. Maybe it needs to be destroyed so that you can start anew, so that you can find out what the truth is. Why should you continue believing lies just for the sake of it? And how can you find out whether it's really the truth or not, whether you're being lied to, if you follow Stephen Lett and David Splane's advice and never listen to any criticism of your beliefs?
But now, talking just a little bit more about apostates, what if an apostate knocked at your front door and said, "I'd like to come into your home, I'd like to sit down with you, and I'd like to teach you some apostate ideas"? Well, you would immediately get rid of him, wouldn't you? You would send him down the highway. But now think of this. What if that same apostate tries to come into your home by means of the television or computer? Well, hopefully, we reject him just as decisively. 2 John 10 says, "If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, never receive him into your home." That would mean not through the front door, not through the television or computer. Sadly, though, some have reasoned, foolishly, if I listen to this apostate on television or the computer, or perhaps read his book, I'll recognize how wrong he is. It'll build up my faith. And if I ever encounter this teaching in the ministry, I'll better be able to refute it. Well, that is foolish thinking indeed. That would be like reasoning, if I eat stinky, rotten food from a garbage can, it'll really help me in the future to recognize bad food. Not very good reasoning, is it? Rather than feed our minds poison apostate ideas, we read God's Word daily and strengthen and safeguard our faith.
Yes, apparently if you encounter an apostate, you need to send him down the highway.
Well, you would immediately get rid of him, wouldn't you? You would send him down the highway.
Oh no, not the highway. The highway of shame. I'm being sent away because I'm an apostate and no one should listen to my ideas. This man is terrified, isn't he? You can smell the desperation on Stephen Lett, just as you could with David Splane. These guys have been rumbled, haven't they? They are terrified that this house of cards is falling down. This elaborate illusion is so easily being untangled by anyone going online and listening to what apostates have to say. It's interesting that Stephen Lett identifies television, videos, and books, was it?
Sadly, though, some have reasoned, foolishly, if I listen to this apostate on television or the computer, or perhaps read his book, I'll recognize how wrong he is. It'll build up my faith.
I'm going to be honest, part of me really wants him to be talking about me, because I obviously have videos that you can play on the computer, and I have a book that Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to read. But what he's referring to, obviously, is the win-win scenario that I often refer to on my channel. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're confronted with information that's critical of your beliefs, it's a win-win scenario for you to look at these criticisms, because either you will realize that these criticisms aren't valid, that the arguments are flawed, and that therefore your faith is valid and your faith will be stronger than ever, or you'll learn that the criticisms are valid, that the arguments against your faith are fair and reasonable, and you'll have the ability to do something about it. You'll have the freedom to leave this false religion behind. And Stephen Lett's best answer to this win-win scenario is, yes, but it's rotten food. And you wouldn't want to eat rotten food, would you?
Well, that is foolish thinking indeed. That would be like reasoning, if I eat stinky, rotten food from a garbage can, it'll really help me in the future to recognize bad food. Not very good reasoning, is it?
As stupid as this is, I actually prefer this to David Splane's answer, because David Splane's answer was to say, well, you wouldn't drink poison, would you? And obviously with poison, the thing about poison is that you can't necessarily tell what is or isn't poison. I mean, obviously, if it has on the bottle poison, you know it's poison. But typically when someone's trying to poison you, they will put it in your drink or put it in your food, and it will be hard to know for sure whether it's poison or not. By using this analogy, Stephen Lett is comparing apostate information to something where you can easily identify whether it's harmful or detrimental or not. Because if food really is stinky and rotten and from a garbage can, you'll be able to decide this for yourself, won't you? There'll be some evidence to suggest that it's rotten. You know, the bad smell will be obvious. You'll be able to see that it's come from a garbage can. And yes, no one in their right mind, hopefully, would eat food like that. But you're basing this judgment on things that can be verified. You can verify the fact, usually, that the food is rotten. You can verify the fact that it's stinky, and you can verify the fact that it's come from a garbage can. By contrast, how are you supposed to verify that apostates are lying if you're not listening to their arguments? If you won't even entertain the basic premise of the apostate's argument, if you're putting your hands over your ears and saying, la, 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 I can't hear you, if you're burying your head in the sand and just refusing to know anything about what their argument actually is, how can you know whether it's rotten? How can you know whether it's stinky? How can you know that it isn't actually delicious, nutritious food for the purposes of this analogy? So what Stephen Lett's done, because he's a bit dim, is replace David Splane's analogy, where there's poison, which you can't test, with his own analogy, comparing apostate information to rotten food, thus weakening the analogy, because how are you supposed to tell whether food is rotten if you're unwilling to look at it? Quite honestly, as I said in my response to David Splane's talk, I am rubbing my hands at all of this ranting against apostates and against the media. Yes, it's frustrating to see my side insulted and subjected to all of this ad hominem and compared to rotten food and compared to poison. You know, they can throw all of these insults as far as I'm concerned, but for me it's delicious that they are desperate enough to do that, that they are so threatened by what apostates are saying and doing. The collective activism of the ex-Jehovah's Witness community is having such a huge impact on the organization that they're seeing because they can see the numbers. It's delicious for me that all of this effort is causing them to be so paranoid and so visibly desperate. The more they jump up and down telling Jehovah's Witnesses, don't look behind the curtain, the more Jehovah's Witnesses are going to want to do precisely that.
Open Lesson 8. Lesson 8, You Can Be Jehovah's Friend. And in the next video, follow along as we see how a teacher uses what is provided in the book to help her students build faith in Jehovah's desire to be her friend. As we look in, they are starting to consider the information under point 6, what Jehovah does for his friends.
Okay, good. Now point 6. What Jehovah does for his friends. Cassie, can you tap that link? Jehovah has done so much for me.
When I was 14, things that happened in the past started to catch up with me emotionally. And I felt like everything that had happened in my life was my fault. Learning from the Bible that God says that he will take my right hand, that he will fortify me, that he will really help me. It blew me away.
This, for me, is the most disturbing part of the 2021 Powerful by Faith convention so far, for reasons I will get into. We're obviously, again, in the Build Faith Using Enjoy Life Forever talk, which is being given by Robert Siranko, and we're now seeing effectively a demonstration on how the new Enjoy Life Forever book is to be used. Robert Siranko asks witnesses in the audience to turn to Lesson 8, Part 6. I have that open here. And indeed, when you read along with the video, you notice that there is a small graphic saying Jehovah has done so much for me. And there, Cassie is asked to tap on the link, because if you have it open on a device, there will be a link directly to the video. She watches the video, and I might as well tell you, the video, Jehovah has done so much for me. Well, here's the blurb on the jw.org website. Crystal, a victim of sexual abuse as a child, tells how learning what the Bible teaches helped her to build a relationship with Jehovah God and to find meaning in her life. This is a 2015 video, 3 minutes, 20 seconds long, where the organization has the gall to suggest that sex abuse may be a problem outside the organization, but it's not a problem inside the organization. Because if you watch the video, which you can easily do, and just a quick warning, it's incredibly manipulative and may well be triggering for many of you who watch it. When you watch the video, you learn that Crystal was abused at the age of 14 before her family became Jehovah's Witnesses. So she went through abuse that led to her being suicidal in later years, but it's Jehovah's Witnesses who provided the answer. As soon as Jehovah's Witnesses turned up in her life, everything started to turn around, and she was able to deal with her pain, deal with the trauma of what happened to her, Jehovah's Witnesses were the solution for her sexual abuse, which, when you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses and how they handle child sexual abuse and all of the lawsuits, the Australian Royal Commission, you name it, any amount of digging will reveal that this is the last organisation to be insinuating we're the solution here. We're the ones who are giving child sex abuse survivors something to console them. This is an organisation that fails child sex abuse survivors. I mean, if this video is intended to have any meaningful say on the subject, you would think it would say, by the way, we recommend that you contact the police straight away and report what happened to you. I mean, granted, that might not have been what she said when she was interviewed for the testimonial. Nevertheless, in the context of an organisation that is notorious for not reporting, to the extent where the Australian Royal Commission found that out of 1,006 cases in Australia stretching back to 1950, not a single one had been reported to the police. If you're going to be making a video dealing with this subject, you make sure it has that piece of information in it. They're not going to have that information in the video, obviously, because they don't want abuse to be reported in all cases. Because when abuse gets reported, the police show up, and in their mind, it drags the congregation into disrepute. It brings reproach on Jehovah's name. Basically, they put their organisation first and the needs of child abuse survivors second. But here we're supposed to believe, oh no, we're the solution here. We're the ones who helped Crystal, and they have the gall to use this particular subject when promoting their new Enjoy Life Forever book. This is the subject, apparently, that's going to convince people that Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth. Only as this dramatization continues, we're going to see yet more evidence that Jehovah's Witnesses aren't interested in proving that they have the truth. They are only interested in manipulating people emotionally.
She mentioned a Bible passage where Jehovah takes our hand. Can you read that at Isaiah 41, 10 and 13? Please.
Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be anxious, for I am your God. I will fortify you. Yes, I will help you. I will really hold on to you with my right hand of righteousness. And 13, for I, Jehovah your God, am grasping your right hand, the one saying to you, do not be afraid, I will help you.
So, Cassie, according to these verses, what does Jehovah promise to do for all of his friends?
Help us when we're down or scared.
Yes. Let's look a little closer, though. I will fortify. I will help. I will really hold on. Does that sound like a friend who can help or a friend who wants to help?
I never thought of God, Jehovah, like that.
Do you think that Jehovah would make a good friend?
Sure.
Why? In verse 10, Jehovah stretches out his hand to you. Which one?
His right.
And then in verse 13, he takes your hand. Which one?
My right. How?
Cassie, come here. So is Jehovah beside you, holding your hand? Or is he
in front?
That's it. His right hand taking your right hand. He's facing you to pull you up and out. Cassie, what has Jehovah pulled you out of?
Wow. Hopelessness.
And that is a direct result of friendship with Jehovah. it grows stronger the more we talk to him. Let's look at that in the next section, okay?
What a beautiful example of using Enjoy Life Forever to build faith in Jehovah.
Well, it was certainly an example, Robert Siranko. I wouldn't call it beautiful, though. I'd call it grotesque and creepy, and basically encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to psychologically coerce those that they're studying with, directly exploiting emotional vulnerability and trauma and depression, and preying upon that as an opportunity to get a foot in the door, to recruit someone into an organization. This is shameful. It's shameful based purely on the emotionally manipulative element, this dramatization. But when you add in that context about them using a video about child sex abuse, and for all we know, this Cassie is an abuse survivor herself, and here she's being shown a video that effectively says abuse is something that happens outside our organization. We're the ones who sweep in and help people like Crystal deal with their abuse. Nonsense. This is an organization that throws abuse survivors under the bus time and time again. I've met them. Abuse survivors in case after case have been punished and shunned for speaking out, for coming forward and making sure their abuse gets addressed. And here they have the gall to use this particular topic as a sales hook and encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to capitalize on emotional vulnerability and mental health issues when using their new Bible study tool.
So in this talk, we're not going to discuss persecution. We're going to discuss two of the subtle means Satan uses to weaken our faith: apostasy and negative reports about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media. So first, let's talk about apostasy, and we'll call it spiritual poison. Now think about poison. What's the best way to avoid being poisoned? Well, we have to recognize poison when we see it and then avoid it. And the same principle applies to teachings that could destroy our faith. And that's not always easy. Now, not many of our brothers and sisters would deliberately get involved with apostates, but it could happen without our realizing it. You know, we receive letters at times from brothers and sisters who are troubled by something they saw on a web page, an accusation, a rumor about the society or about the organization. And the problem is, they had no idea that apostates were behind it. It's tricky, because the apostates don't advertise, "You are now on an apostate webpage." They often pose as sincere witnesses who just have questions or concerns. And some who aren't really apostates can cause just as much trouble as the apostates do by their negative talk and criticism. Brothers, we need to be on the alert. This is serious. Suppose that, out of curiosity, you get into a discussion forum with individuals who claim to be Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You don't know. You've never met them. And someone starts asking questions. What did you think of last month's broadcast? Did you really find it encouraging? Or do you think the brothers who write Watchtower articles are living in the real world? I wonder if they realize just how hard it is out here. And then a few others join in with their own negative comments. Now, you don't know whether these individuals are apostates or just brothers and sisters who are in serious spiritual trouble. But does it matter? How does it make you feel? When you leave the forum, do you feel upbuilt? Determined to expand your ministry? More convinced than ever that Jehovah has an organization that you love and that you're delighted to be a part of. You feel honored to be a part of that organization. Or does the experience leave you sad, uneasy, uncomfortable?
And there we have a direct appeal to emotion. It doesn't matter whether it's a valid criticism of Jehovah's Witnesses. How does it make you feel? If it makes you feel uneasy, if it makes you feel dispirited about your Jehovah's Witness beliefs, then it's not worth paying any attention to. You should avoid it. In fact, it's not just that you should avoid it. You should view it as spiritual poison.
So first, let's talk about apostasy, and we'll call it spiritual poison.
So we've already had in this talk apostates referred to as sneaky. We've had apostates referred to as rot. And now we're having apostasy referred to as spiritual poison. Do you get the feeling this isn't a religion that handles criticism all that well? That's the overriding feeling I'm getting here. And hopefully, I'm not alone here. Hopefully, even believing Jehovah's Witnesses will be watching this thinking, what is it with this religion? And its seeming inability to deal with even the slightest, mildest criticism. I mean, you think of the examples David Splane was giving there of people saying less than flattering things about JW Broadcasting, or suggesting that the writers of Watchtower articles might not be fully living in the real world. These are really mild criticisms of the organization compared to what we can say about things like child abuse and blood transfusions and domestic violence. He's picking some real softballs, and apparently even this really, really mild criticism of the organization is poison, is something that people should absolutely avoid as a matter of life or death. And going back to this whole thing about apostates being really sneaky, he says,
it's tricky because the apostates don't advertise you are now on an apostate webpage. They often pose as sincere witnesses who just have questions or concerns.
Ladies and gentlemen, behold my book, which, as you can see, is literally titled The Reluctant Apostate in huge letters on the front. And in case you're saying, yes, but that's a book, that's not a website. Well, I have a website as well with the same title. Reluctantapostate.co is the website that accompanies this book. So how on earth I can be accused of being sneaky, of not being open about the fact that I'm an apostate? And also, if you go on YouTube, you'll quite often find that people will put XJW in the description or in the channel name when it comes to their videos. They're not suggesting when they make their videos that they are believing Jehovah's Witnesses who just have doubts. Pretty much every XJW channel I can think of is very open right out of the gate when it comes to their standing, whether they're disfellowshipped or disassociated or still inside as perhaps faders, because you sometimes get YouTubers who have to hide their identity. I just feel David Splane is openly misleading his audience here and trying to manufacture this bogeyman who doesn't really exist. I mean, apostates simply aren't sneaking around in the way he suggests. If anything, there's quite some defeatism when it comes to actual apostates. When they get out, when they wake up from their Jehovah's Witness indoctrination, they kind of realize almost straight away that it's almost impossible to just wake up their friends and relatives by approaching them and saying, oh, by the way, did you know that we were all lied to? Did you know that this is a false religion? In fact, it's a cult, and I'm prepared to give you all the reasons why. They know how their friends and loved ones are going to react when they try confronting them with apostate information. So actually, in most cases, I would even argue the vast majority of cases, former Jehovah's Witnesses just sort of surrender to the idea that their friends and relatives can't be salvaged, and they go off and they do their thing. Now, when people like myself don't do that, when we do produce content, we're making it available for people when they're ready to look at it, and we're making it very clear what our position is. At least I know I am. I make it very clear in almost every video. I mean, I'm not going to just repeat the same spiel at the beginning of every video. Hello, I'm Lloyd Evans, and I'm a former Jehovah's Witness, and I identify as an apostate. But it should be clear to any Jehovah's Witness who stumbles on my channel and spends any amount of time watching my videos exactly where I'm coming from. They should be able to figure out very quickly that I'm not pretending to be a Jehovah's Witness. So I guess we're left with the question, why does David Splane need to lie? Why does he need to entirely mischaracterize apostates and mislead Jehovah's Witnesses with these sweeping generalizations about apostates sneaking around? Again, those that do sneak around have a reason to be sneaky, have a reason to stay below the radar. It's because David Splane and his colleagues have manufactured an environment in which, if they are open about their lack of beliefs, there will be crushing penalties.
Now, for the purpose of this discussion, let's consider another way we can test out words, and that is to pay attention to what the words mean. Remember, we talked about media reports and how these are very often carefully worded to avoid a lawsuit. So suppose a report indicates that someone has been charged with a crime or that he's being investigated. All right, you have two words, charged and investigated. It doesn't mean he's guilty. Or suppose that someone is convicted and put in jail. Well, that would apply to our young brothers in Korea, wouldn't it? They were convicted and jailed. And what was their crime? They refused to kill someone. Did they do anything wrong? Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God. So, brothers, we really have to think about these things. We may read that a person or an organization was sued and then settled out of court. Does settling out of court mean that they were guilty? Not necessarily. Now, in this country and others, court cases are often handled by a jury. Now, who are on the jury? Ordinary citizens with no legal training. But not only that, these ordinary citizens don't always have access to all the facts because the judge and lawyers decide which facts will be shared with the jury. So it's unlikely that the whole truth will ever come out in court. Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court. Now, sometimes attorneys deliberately withhold information that would be prejudicial to their clients. And in addition, the juries have prejudices like everyone else, and some of them just can't set their prejudices aside.
What we've just heard is arguably the most damning video material featuring a governing body member maybe ever. This is disgusting rhetoric. Again, I hardly know where to begin, but what I will do is something that's drastically different from what David Splane is doing. I'm going to dignify my audience, and rather than speaking to them like children, rather than speaking in vague terms and just expecting my audience to play some game of guess what's on my mind, which is what David Splane always seems to do, I'm going to dignify my audience and just say it like it is. This man is speaking about child sexual abuse lawsuits. That's what he's talking about. And nowhere is he saying child sexual abuse lawsuits. He's just trying to soften up his audience. He's just trying to manipulate his audience into thinking that when they read something in the newspapers or watch something on the news about Jehovah's Witnesses being involved in child abuse litigation, or settling a child abuse lawsuit, or a Jehovah's Witness being convicted of child sex abuse, they're supposed to think of it as not being such a big deal. That's what this is all about. Again, I'm doing what David Splane can't be bothered to do or doesn't want to do. I'm telling it like it is. This is what he's talking about. And how shameful. What has this organization become? We're at the point where Jehovah's Witness leaders are basically demeaning the entire concept of criminality. That's what this is about. And he can try and work in that stuff about political neutrality and the brothers in Korea. What was it he said?
Or suppose that someone is convicted and put in jail. Well, that would apply to our young brothers in Korea, wouldn't it? They were convicted and jailed. And what was their crime? They refused to kill someone?
He's literally trying to draw a comparison between young Jehovah's Witness men jailed in Korea for conscientious objection and people being jailed over child abuse. Obviously, they are completely different things, but we can see where he's going with this. Again, he's manipulating his audience with the basic argument of we can't trust the courts, we can't trust the judicial system, we should view with suspicion whenever Jehovah's Witnesses are arrested for anything. That's his basic argument, to the point where he goes on to say,
did they do anything wrong? Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God.
So it doesn't matter, apparently, if someone's a convicted criminal, convicted by a court of law of doing a crime, of committing, of perpetrating a heinous act against another human being. It doesn't matter if a court of law has found a person guilty of committing crime. What matters is what God thinks. And I think we can all see what's happening here. I think David Splane is trying to preempt not just reports where Jehovah's Witness elders perhaps are jailed over child abuse. I think he is laying the groundwork for his own arrest, for the arrest of the governing body at some future point, because what they are doing is criminal, at least as far as I'm concerned. I don't know where the law stands on the industrial scale cover-up of child abuse on a database with thousands of names of predators that isn't being handed over to the police. But if that's not criminal now, it sure as hell will be in the future. And so it's conceivable that in our lifetime, David Splane and his colleagues will end up behind bars. I think that that's what should happen now. I think that's how serious this is. And I think David Splane is insecure about this prospect. So he's conditioning the Jehovah's Witness audience with an argument, with a pre-made argument of pay no mind to this. Just because you're seeing Tony Morris, David Splane, Stephen Lett behind bars with the rest of them doesn't mean they actually did something wrong. What matters is how God sees things. And when you get to that point with a religion, when you get to the point where religious leaders are making excuses for crime, are suggesting that crime isn't really such a big deal, and we should pay no mind under certain circumstances if someone is criminally convicted, you know you need to get out. And I'm speaking now to Jehovah's Witnesses who might be watching this. Come on, how do you defend this? How do you defend a religion that is now basically making it okay to commit crime under certain circumstances? This footage will age like milk. It will follow David Splane around to his dying breath. I'm certainly going to do everything I can to make sure it follows him around to his dying breath. You can be sure that what we've just seen now, this clip that we've just been examining, will be played again and again and again in documentaries that are dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses and the wide-scale cover-up of child sexual abuse, because it displays openly at a glance the contempt this organization has for the well-being of others, the contempt the leaders have for the very concept of being held accountable by law. And one more thing before we move on. I hope you caught the part where there was this Freudian slip by David Splane where he says,
So it's unlikely that the whole truth will ever come out in court. Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court.
Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court. Isn't that interesting? Neither side. Again, we're talking, I know he doesn't make this clear because he's trying to trick people. He's trying to deliberately muddy the waters and make this as vague as possible. But we're talking here about child sexual abuse litigation. We're talking about lawsuits surrounding the abuse of children and how that abuse has been handled or mishandled. Lawsuits that this organization that David Splane represents or leads is routinely getting caught up in. And here he's basically admitting neither side wants the truth to come out, meaning we don't want the truth to come out either.
So, what do we say in revision? In conclusion, our faith is under attack, and we have to fight. And Jehovah gives us what we need to fight with. One of the things he gives us, good associations. Satan will try to lure us away from good associations. He'll try to weaken our faith by getting us involved in bad association without our knowing it. But Jehovah provides good association in the congregation. These are people we know. These are people we love. These are people who have our best interests at heart. Keep in mind the principle we find at Proverbs 13 and verse 20. The one walking with the wise will become wise, but the one who has dealings with the stupid will fare badly. You know the members of your congregation. You know that they are wise. You know that they have your best interests at heart. But if you get involved in a forum, you might not know whether you're walking with wise persons or not, at least not at first. So be careful. If the conversation turns negative, get out. Satan is behind the twisted teachings of apostates. He's the father of the lie. And those who lie are doing exactly what their father does. The apostates have nothing to offer us, brothers. All they have to offer is hate. All they have is, to offer is criticism and negative talk. But oh, how upbuilt we feel when we're with those who love Jehovah. So Jehovah provides us with good, wholesome associations. He also provides us with his word of truth, and an accurate knowledge of the truth is the best defense against apostasy. Read the Bible every day and meditate on it. Pay attention to the words. Pay attention to what they mean. Be like the Bereans, referred to in Acts chapter 17.
I'm glad he mentioned the Bereans, and we will revisit his reasoning regarding the Bereans, which I agree with, by the way, but I do just need to interject because we've heard an awful lot there. We're obviously in David Splane's concluding talk on the Saturday, Put Up a Hard Fight for the Faith, a 34-minute rant against apostates and the media, and I hope you noticed the patronizing, scornful, condescending way that David Splane is talking down to his audience.
So be careful. If the conversation turns negative, get out.
We're at the point where a governing body member is literally barking orders at his followers. This man is clearly rattled, clearly disturbed, clearly desperate, to the point where he's just yapping. He's just barking orders, get out, don't have anything to do with it, ignore them, be careful, if you go against what I'm telling you here, you will pay. That's the nature now of the Jehovah's Witness religion. That's the climate of fear and control that this organization has descended into. I also find it fascinating where he talks about good association.
But Jehovah provides good association in the congregation. These are people we know. These are people we love. These are people who have our best interests at heart.
when it comes to the industrial scale cover-up of child sexual abuse, to the point where this organization is keeping a database with thousands of names on it that aren't being passed on to law enforcement, isn't it precisely the point that Jehovah's Witnesses don't know who's in their congregation? They don't know who they can trust. They don't know who is or isn't a sex offender, because that information is being kept from them on a secret database, which we can prove because of documented policies, as I've gone into before. In fact, if Tibor is gracious, here's just one video where I summarize all the reasons why we know that there is a database of child abusers being kept by the organization. So how can Jehovah's Witnesses know who's good and who's bad? And as for these are people we love, well, it's love that's paper thin, isn't it? It's love that evaporates the moment you do something slightly untoward, according to the expectations of the organization. Even just having doubts, even just missing the odd meeting, even not being so regular on the ministry, you will start to be shunned as bad association. That's the love that never fails, that David Splane is apparently so proud of. And as for this dig about apostates having nothing to offer, David Splane has the gall to say,
"The apostates have nothing to offer us, brothers. All they have to offer is hate. All they have to offer is criticism and negative talk."
Interestingly, I made a video on this only a month ago. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear. What can apostates offer? And I made the point in that video that we can actually offer quite a lot. We can offer freedom of mind, the ability to think for yourself, the freedom to not have scam artists and charlatans like this David Splane lecturing you on what information you can or can't consider. The freedom to be in control of your life. This is control that David Splane insists on having. The governing body insists on micromanaging the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses, on doing their thinking for them, on making their decisions for them, even in areas as intimate as what medicine you should accept. Apostates, on the other hand, people like myself, are saying, you know what, you decide that stuff. You're a grown-up, you can figure this out for yourself. You do not need an organization to run your life for you. That's what apostates are offering, the freedom to think for yourself. I think on some level David Splane knows this, but he is terrified of losing control, and this fear, this desperation has been palpable throughout his talk. So those were my 10 worst moments from the 2021 Powerful by Faith convention. I must admit it was hard narrowing it down to just 10 with so much dreadful material to choose from. But the examples I've just given, I feel, perfectly demonstrate the darker side of Jehovah's Witnesses. And with any luck, they've given some of you who still hold a candle for this being God's one and only true organization food for thought. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.